Higgins.
Minister, with absolute respect, and I know it's a discussion we had previously, the Minister himself acknowledged that many of the areas, in fact, and that is one of the advantages of the newly designated areas, is that they tend to be contiguous territory, larger areas that are overlapping, but that many of the areas which may be de-designated are in fact small areas. And I know that many people who have areas that will be under 10 hectares, that will be small areas. And I would perhaps caveat that that doesn't mean that there's not commercial usage. So, for example, Minister, another approach to this might be if one was to outlaw certain kinds of machinery. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that people have to go back to only using the schley if they are cutting turf, but there is a question of if sausage machines are used, and they are used in smaller areas, and they often, in fact, are moving from area to area, and that does happen. So we do know that machinery may be rented, may be taken in, may be hired for a period of time. So there is a question there in relation to those smaller areas, because if we have a 5-hectare area and a 6-hectare area and a 7-hectare area, and they're kind of falling, and they are exactly some of the areas the Minister has already indicated are likely to be de-designated under this legislation, if they become a patchwork of areas in which we can have harvesting coming through, there is a problem. And Minister, again, I would note that while there are other areas of regulatory framework, these areas, those questions, are key information for you to have if you are, in this bill, giving yourself the power to make decisions about de-designation, and to make decisions about de-designation balancing community, social, environmental and cultural factors together. Then you need that information. We talked about the scientific information that you need to make in terms of environmental information, in terms of your decisions on the environmental impact, but you also need regulatory information, because it is quite different if you de-designate in terms of the environmental impact that an area will have, if it is or is not coming under a regulatory framework. And what the regulatory framework is matters also, even as we discussed previously in terms of the pollinator plan, for example. So, Minister, simply saying that there will be a regulatory framework and that one is being developed is, as I'm sure you can see, an area of concern. We really should have a lot more clarity about what that regulatory framework might look like. And perhaps, Minister, if you do not want to use as bold a phrase as I have as commercial turf harvesting, perhaps there may be other ways to achieve similar goals, by perhaps indicating what forms of harvesting are appropriate. And again, that comes back to that idea of turbary rights, household use. What is household use? What do we define as, and recognising that households are different, what do we define as household use? And to say that it's not simply a free-form interpretation, and that when we de-designate a bog and say that it is no longer a natural heritage area, and because it is perhaps under 10 hectares, it doesn't simply fall into an area of unregulated free usage of any kind, that there does need to be some kind of a bar or a moderate set. Minister, I will just indicate these amendments will be returning.
Senator, as it is now 6 o'clock and in accordance with the order of the day, I must ask you to report progress.
Report progress.
Thank you very much.